Calamity Jane was a complex figure of the American West. She was noted for her compassion towards the sick and destitute, while also exhibiting a carefree, rough, and sometimes dangerous lifestyle. She wore a dress on some occasions and rugged men's clothes on others. As with anything, it depended on what she was doing. She led a tough life and was said to work for the Pony Express, was a soldier, acted in Wild West shows, and palled around with Wild Bill Hickok. Calamity Jane was born Martha Jane Canary on May 1st, 1852 in Princeton, Missouri. She was raised the oldest of 6 children in a house where her father struggled with a gambling addiction. When Jane was 13, her father moved the family to Virginia City, Montana, and it was around this time her mother had died of pneumonia. By the spring of 1866, the family relocated to a farm in Salt Lake City, Utah, where Jane recalled her childhood. "I always had a fondness for adventure and outdoor exercise, and especially fondness for horses, which I began to ride at an early age and continued to do so until I became an expert rider, being able to ride the most vicious and stubborn of horses. In fact, the greater portion of my life in early times was spent in this manner." However, tragedy struck again when her father passed and had to become the head of the household. At 14, she moved her family eventually to Piedmont, Wyoming. In Piedmont, Jane took odd jobs to support her siblings, from just about every restaurant position to dance hall girl, nurse, and even an ox team driver. It was a hard life, filling in her parents' shoes. In her early 20s, she was allegedly working as a scout for General Custer at Fort Russell, while also being an on and off job as a prostitute at the Fort Laramie 3-mile hog ranch. Jane claims, "Up to this time, I had always worn the costume of my sex. When I joined Custer, I donned the uniform of a soldier. It was a bit awkward at first, but I soon got to be perfectly at home in men's clothes." Jane sometimes rode in the Black Hills as a Pony Express rider and thought to have received her nickname in a military conflict with Native Americans around 1862 at Goose Creek, Wyoming. "We were ordered out to quell an uprising of the Indians, and we were out for several days, had numerous skirmishes during which 6 of the soldiers were killed and several severely wounded." Her captain, James Egan, was fired upon returning from one of these bloody battles. Jane was riding ahead and heard the shot. She turned to see her captain fall and begin to slide from his saddle. She swiftly turned her horse and galloped back, catching him before he fell. Jane lifted him onto her horse and rode safely to the fort. When Captain Egan recovered, he joked, "I name you Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains." Whether she was active in campaigns is disputed, but she was well known throughout the plains, sometimes rough and ready for a fight, but also equally popular as a humanitarian. One theory is that she acquired her name as a warning to other men who unwisely insulted her, as they would be courting Calamity. In any case, by 1876, she carried the nickname, as the Deadwood newspaper reported it on Hickok's arrival with the headline that ran, "Calamity Jane has arrived." Of course, another plausible account of her daring ways comes from her autobiography, in which she was ordered to the Big Horn River under General Crook in 1875. She swam 90 miles to deliver dispatches and fought her illness from it after. Recovering, she rode to Fort Laramie and joined a wagon train, driven by Charlie Utter. Here she met Wild Bill Hickok and followed him to Deadwood, South Dakota. In Deadwood, Jane befriended a madam named Dora Dufran and worked for her on occasion, but primarily was found around the likes of Wild Bill Hickok and Charlie Utter. It is uncertain if Jane and Wild Bill Hickok had a platonic or a loving relationship. There was a claim of offspring presented in 1941 with a marriage record recorded in 1873, but not all historians agree. Officially, Jane gave birth to 2 daughters, although with an unknown father. A benefit was held for one of her daughters to raise money for her education. It was successful, but Jane, which had become a heavy drinker, fell to her vice and spent some money drinking. Yet, it did not stop her daughter from receiving a good education. When Jane heard of Hickok's murder, she was in town without her guns, but grabbed a meat cleaver and tried to track down Jack McCall, who had shot him and fled. She recalled, "I at once started to look for the assassin and found him at Shirley's butcher shop and grabbed a meat cleaver and made him throw up his hands. Through the excitement on hearing of Bill's death, having left my weapons on the post of my bed, he was then taken to a log cabin and locked up." Jane continued to live in Deadwood and was known for more feats, including diverting a raiding party that planned to attack an overland stagecoach. In its action, the stagecoach driver slumped over dead, and Jane jumped onto the coach and took over the reins, driving it safely to Deadwood. These were just some of the fanciful heroics she was typically known for. In the later half of the 1870s, a smallpox epidemic sprang out in Deadwood, and Jane took to nursing its victims. By the fall of 1877, Jane went to Bear Butte Creek with the 7th Cavalry to build Fort Meade and Sturgis. A year later, she was in Rapid City for mining. In 1881, Jane bought a ranch she used partly as an inn along the Yellowstone River near Miles City, Montana. Never one to sit idle, she left the ranch and traveled through California and other western states. One story has her marrying a Clinton Burke from Texas, whom she moved together to Boulder to work again and live in an inn. In 1887, they had a daughter named Jessie. Reportedly, Jessie was adopted out to foster parents, but luck would again arise in 1893 when Jane's popularity brought her a job as a storyteller for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. At the end of the century, she was also in the Pan American Exposition. Her health, though, was taking its toll, and Jane suffered from depression and alcohol. Notoriety brought her back to the Black Hills, where she rejoined her friend Dora in her business as a cook and laundress of the brothel. In late July of 1903, Jane traveled by ore train to Terry, a small mining community near Deadwood. She was reportedly drinking heavily and had become sick to her stomach. The conductor had to carry her off the train as a bartender escorted her to a room at the Callaway Hotel. A doctor came, but Jane died soon after. She was 51 and succumbed to inflammation of the bowels and pneumonia. To a large gathering, Jane was buried beside James Butler Hickok in Mount Moriah Cemetery, South Dakota. It is rumored to say this would not have been his wish, but it was definitely hers. Thanks for watching, and this is all for Biographies of the West. Until next time.